Before we proceed to the video, for more LEED AP O+M study material, you can contact me on my email and on my LinkedIn as usual. Hello and welcome to Sustainable Sites. 10 points for this credit category maximum. And this is the distribution that we will be going through one by one. It has one prerequisite called Site Management Policy, and we have 7 credits. I would like to mention two things here. One, the sustainable site is generally dealing with everything on the outdoors of the project. So if you have any light pollution reduction, for example, we have a credit here, it's dealing with the outdoor lights. Mainly it deals with anything that is outdoor. In the indoors, we have different credits and different categories to deal with. This is first. Secondly, one thing that will be consistent in all the other credit categories as well is that if you have any policy in the prerequisite, it is usually followed by the credit implementing that policy. We've got other policies coming like green cleaning policy, we have purchasing policies, and they are followed by the respective credits. So this is what we'll be going through one by one. So let's move on to the first prerequisite. So the one and only prerequisite is site management policy for sustainable sites. And the intended requirement is to create and implement a policy that is going to manage and deploy the best practices to reduce the harmful chemical use. And also if there is any air pollution due to the operational elements, if there is any chemical runoff, if there is any energy and solid waste. As we said that we are basically dealing with the exterior of the project or of the building. So what things can fall in under this management policy? The emissions, the low emissions equipment can be used. The equipment could be your lawnmower that is used in the exterior, or if there is any leaf blower, if it was propane powered, or if it was gasoline powered, you can go for low or zero emissions equipment. You can use all the time manual lawnmower instead of a powered one. The snow and ice removal is required by law around your project. You can implement certain strategies like you can pre-treat your pavement, which will reduce tomorrow when the snow or ice has fallen. The less amount of de-icer might be used. You can use salt-free de-icers. These are the policies that have to be implemented. And you can use electronic spreader controls to basically reduce the amount of de-icer that needs to be applied because it is now more evenly distributed by the electronic system. The building exterior cleaning can go with the power washing, which will reduce the amount of fluid, any chemical fluid that needs to be mixed or installed. And you can reduce any gasoline equipment or introduce any manual equipment instead of gasoline. Organic waste management is important. The leaves that are going to fall, you can compost or mulch those leaves on site or any off-site facility that is composting or mulching. Now we will see one by one in the next slide with the photos of all these strategies like compost and mulching and power washing. So furthermore, things that fall under the site management policy is erosion and sedimentation control, which is basically taking out all the things from the drain that are not supposed to be there. Could be any debris or any garbage, and you should have a plan not only for ongoing operations or maintenance operations, but if there are any new works that are to be planned and to be done on the project. If you're using any fertilizers for your outdoors, it should not be based on ammonia. It should be quick release or organic or synthetic fertilizers. Invasive and exotic plants management should be done. You have to identify if there is any invasive or exotic vegetation, and we have to eradicate them. We're going to see in the next slide what does it mean. And the irrigation, if your project requires irrigation, you should be looking for any leaks or breaks, and it has to be monitored every 2 weeks. The group plantings is going to reduce your water usage. The drip irrigation is going to give you more efficiency in using the outdoor water. For the storage of materials and equipment, you have to do it better in a way which is recommended by the manufacturer and avoid any leakage to prevent any issues with the indoor air quality. So these are the things that fall under the site management policy, and you just need to submit for documentation the policy document. And if you out of these things, if you have not included any operational elements, you have to justify. For example, if you did not include any irrigation management, you can justify saying that you do not have any irrigation on your project. So this is what the requirement of the documentation is. Power washing is something that we saw in the previous slide. It's kind of self-explanatory what it is doing, using the pressurized water to serve the cleaning purpose, and it's doing nicely. The only thing is that they're trying to avoid any use of any fluid or any chemical which might be harmful to the environment. We've also seen invasive and exotic plants that are to be eradicated. First of all, they are to be identified, then they have to be eradicated. The best is to use the native plants. Now, there's a small difference between invasive and exotic plants. The exotic plants is non-native to the area, but exotic plant may or may not be harmful for the ecosystem. But invasive plant is not only non-native, but it is also harmful for the ecosystem. So for this site management policy, we have to identify and eradicate. Drip irrigation, I'm sure many of you have seen. Just use the smart irrigation system for the better use of water in irrigation. Compost or mulch. Uh, Basically, both are decayed organic materials, usually leaves and other plant material. But there's a small difference. The compost act as a fertilizer. It is usually mixed with the fertilizers, whereas mulch you spray or you spread on top of the soil, and it is basically used to retain the moisture in the soil, and it also try to keep the weeds away. So this is what a slight of difference in between compost and mulch, but both are decayed materials. So credit number one, site management for 1 point. If you see in the reference guide, the site management is the last credit, but I have put it together with the site management policy because I thought it makes more sense. The intent is to preserve ecological integrity, environmentally sensitive site management practices, and the purpose is to provide clean and maintained exterior of the building, which is basically sort of the requirement or the intent of the policy as well. That's the reason the requirement for this credit number one is to implement the prerequisite and one of the options. So the first option is the limited turf area for 1 point. You have to limit the turf for less than or equal to 25% of the total vegetated areas, and playgrounds or fields in schools or parks should be excluded in that calculation. Straightforward credit, the percentage of total vegetated area would be turf divided by the total area including turf by 100. So documentation, just you need to show that the turf area is complying with the above formula, and you can go for either this option or the second option. So out of the three options, the option number two is to use all manual and electric powered equipment which are used to serve the purpose of operation and maintenance in the building exterior. So it should not include only the equipment used by the project team, but also if there is any vendor who is providing these services, the equipment from this vendor should also be considered, and the replacement might be necessary. So the documentation is just the complete inventory showing that it is either manual or electric powered. These are some of the examples that you can see. Lawnmower going from the gas powered or propane powered to manual. Also the leaf blower going all electric. The option number three is to show and maintain the reductions from the emissions from the site maintenance equipment. Now, in the previous one, we saw that equipment replacement was necessary because you have to go all electric. So in this one, they are giving you an option to reduce the number of or reduce the emissions that are being emitted in the atmosphere by these maintenance equipment. So 50% reduction in hydrocarbons and NOx, 75% in carbon monoxide from the baseline. Now, from where the baseline will come? The current practices are to be entered in a USDBC calculator with, for example, the model of the equipment, the type of the equipment, how many equipments of such type you're using, and for how long you are using that equipment will give you a baseline. And then we have the strategy from option number 2, that if we replace the gas powered by electrical or manual, definitely it is going to reduce the number of emissions from the baseline. And also the second is that we can reduce the running time of the equipment, and it will also reduce the emissions from the baseline that is being calculated. So sometimes it's not possible to transfer all of them to the electric, but the third option is given in order to reduce the emissions from the baseline. So calculation of baseline emissions by the USGBC calculator and the reduction results comparison sheets. How you reduce the number of emissions? It could be either by replacing the equipment, certain number of equipments, or by reducing the runtime. So credit number 2 is site development. Protect or restore habitat for 2 number of points maximum, 1 to 2 points. We've got multiple options. The requirement is to conserve any existing natural areas on site and to restore if there are any damaged areas, and the purpose is to promote biodiversity. Biodiversity in the simplest word is, in the simplest form, is the variability of life, and it's natural to have the species thriving in its own natural environment. So option number 1 is on-site restoration, to have in place native or adaptive vegetation for 20% of total site area. So if you have any site area that you know for your project, multiplied by 0.2 or 20%, and this would be the required area for native or adaptive vegetation. But there is a constraint that minimum of 5,000 square feet is to be there to achieve this credit. In case it's not there, then you have to go to the other options. And as we said that the species thrive in the natural environment. So if any environment that was naturally unvegetated, like it could be a rocky mountain, or if there is any pond, or you are in a desert, in that case it will count itself. You would not need to vegetate that area because that is naturally an unvegetated area. So the documentation is the total site area of your project, the vegetated area based on the calculation that we have seen, multiplying by 20%. And if there are any natural and vegetated areas, the documentation proof is to be submitted. This is option number 1. If your project does not comply with the 5,000 square feet, then you have to find your solution, or to earn this credit in other options. So the other options will be discussed. So the second option is straightforward, but it might cost you a little bit because you have to provide financial support of 5 cents per square feet of the total site area. In the previous option, the total site area is to be multiplied by 20% in order to have native and adaptive vegetation, protecting or restoring the habitat. But in this case, you just need to provide 5 cents per total square feet of the project, and this would be the minimum financial contribution. If you are in US, the land trust should be recognized by Land Trust Alliance, and in case you are outside US, it should be locally recognized and within 100 miles of the project. The documentation is to provide the financial support calculations, which requires the total site area times 0.05 and the agreement with the land trust, and if they are accredited in case of US by LTA and local for others. The exemplary performance can be earned in this credit with option number 1 and option number 2. Option number 1, you can show 40% native vegetation, and for option number 2, if you increase from 5 cents to 10 cents per square feet. So credit number 3 is rainwater management for 3 points, but for school adaptation only 2 points. One of my favorite credit, which the intent is to reduce the runoff and improve water quality by replicating the natural hydrology of that area or of that environment based on what we have received the historical conditions. Now, if you see the figure below on the left and on the right, the one on the left is showing the natural hydrology, and the right one is showing after the infrastructure was built. So what is the difference? The runoff is 10% in the natural condition, whereas it is 55% in the built environment or with the infrastructure. And in 55% runoff, it is directed towards the storm drains. And the infiltration, shallow infiltration is 25%, which means that the area was pervious. It allows the water to go inside, whereas in case of impervious areas, the shallow infiltration is only 10% and deep infiltration is only 5%. And impervious means that in the right figure, there was asphalt or there was concrete or there were blocks or tiles that did not allow the water to be charged inside. So we have to find a way in order to charge the water in the ground and to slow off the runoff. The evapotranspiration of the built environment is also 30 compared to 40%. So we have some techniques that we can deploy in order to replicate a natural hydrology. These are called LID techniques, or low impact development, or green infrastructure GI practices, to capture and treat water. Now there is a certain small calculation. From 25% of impervious surfaces, we know what is impervious surface, and 95th percentile storm event. So if you have a rainfall data, you can know that what is the 95th percentile of the historical rain data in that area, and how much water that you need to treat. And you have to establish annual inspections that these numbers are being followed. So you should have a rainfall data for the documentation showing the 95th percentile value of the water that you need to manage on ground, and the runoff volume of 25% of impervious area, and the calculation of water managed by green infrastructure and low impact development techniques. You have to show that you have maintained the inspections, and the maintenance is done for all the works. So now let's see what are the GI and LID techniques. I explained this in detail in also LEED AP BD plus C videos in rainwater management credit, and I will post the link to that video, and I will also show to which minute you can forward it to in order to understand it better. So the green infrastructure and LID techniques, the main purpose is to do two things. One is to slow down the speed of water, and the second one is to find a way to charge the water back in the ground, which is basically replicating the natural hydrology. So this is what all these techniques do. Bioswales and rain gardens, they capture the water, they retain the water, and they charge the ground back in. The rainwater harvesting is another technique that is collecting the water, and you can use this water again for any irrigation purposes. If you have a proper plumbing system, you can charge them back into the toilets. Green roofs serve two purposes. If you have proper piping, it can also slow down the water on the roof level, and then the remaining water can be captured as rainwater harvesting. The permeable pavers not only slows down the speed of the water, because it's unlike the asphalt and other paving, it has gaps in between, so the water slows down, and also it charges back into the ground. And we have an exemplary performance of 1 point if water is captured and treated from 50% instead of 25% impervious surfaces. The next credit is heat island reduction, but let us quickly review the heat island effect first, which is when there is a temperature difference of 3 degrees in between the urban and suburban setting, basically due to the human activities. So what are those human activities? If you see on the figure in the right, there is heat from the road surface, and there is heat released from the vehicles that are running on these roads, which are not as many as in the suburban setting. Then heat is being extracted from the buildings and released into the atmosphere from the heat pumps, then the heat reflected from the building surfaces. So there are a lot of things that are not there in the suburban areas or in the suburbs, and it is there in the urban areas due to human activities. There is this 3 degrees difference. So we have to find a way or find strategies in order to reduce this heat island effect. So there are some other terminologies that are going to be used, and I will be discussing it in the next slide, and then we will move on to the heat island reduction credit. Some other terminologies that we need to understand before we move on to the options is solar reflectance and solar reflectance index. The difference is that the solar reflectance is used for non-roof materials, which means that the things that are not used basically as a roof. They are used to shade, but they are not basically used as a roof. And it's also known as albedo, just to measure the solar heat rejection, how much it rejects based on a scale of 0 to 1. 0 means absorption, 1 indicates total reflection. But when it comes to the roofing materials, we use solar reflectance index, which is not only that how much heat it reflects, but also how quickly a surface releases or emits absorbed heat and returns to its normal temperature, because inhabitants or the occupants is inside. So if it does not emit or if it does not emit the absorbed heat, it will be translated down and change the atmosphere inside the building. So for the roofing materials, these two factors are used, known as reflectance index, and the standard black is 0 and standard white is 100. If you try to generalize both of them, the more the better. If you are closer to 1 or you are closer to 100, you are using the best of it. And 3-year aged SR and SRIs will be used in the options. It should be used as per the American Society of Testing Materials standard and the clause E1980. So now we are going to see the option. Now we know what is SR, what is heat island effect, and what is SRI, used for non-roof and roof respectively. Credit number 4, heat island reduction for 1 to 2 points. Now we have gone through what is SR or albedo, what is SRI, what does heat island effect means. So the intended requirement for this credit is to minimize effect on human and wildlife habitats by reducing the heat island effect. We know there are two things, non-roof and roof, SR and SRI. So first we'll look at, out of 4 options, let's look at the first one, which is the combination of the following strategies for minimum 50% of site paving. Now, site paving is outdoors, of course, excluding the vegetated areas. It could be like the parking area and the walking path. And you can have plant shading or vegetated planters, but these should be installed during the plants should be there physically in the performance period. Shading with the photovoltaic system is also one of the strategy. Architectural shading, we're going to see what it is in the next slide as an example. Or paving material with 3-year aged SR or solar reflectance or albedo of 0.28 or initial albedo of 0.33. Now, there is a possibility that your architectural shading or paving material has different components, or you have different SR for paving material and different for architectural shading, and it might be less than 0.28 3-year aged or less than 0.33 initially. In that case, still compliance is possible by making the weighted average, if you see the formula below, area of high reflectance non-roof A times the solar high reflectance non-roof A by required SR. So it's going to give you the ratio, divide by 0.5, which is the requirement of 50% site paving, plus the other one that is compliant of this SR values, and it's adding them all up should be greater than total site paving area. So it's not like you have to have all of the materials or non-roof shading or paving uh, complying with 0.28 or 0.33. It is possible to use the weighted average. And the last one is open grade paving system with 50% unbound. What is unbound? Simply to put it in a straightforward way is that if you're not using concrete, if you're not using asphalt, this would be the unbound paving. The example would be the compacted sand, and on top if you have the interlock. Now, the documentation for this option number 1 is to have total non-roof area calculations, because based on these calculations, you should have 50% of site paving, site plan with the project boundary, building footprint with non-roof area measurements. This is required because you have to compare it with the non-roof measured area of the reflected paving material or architectural shading or the other strategies that you have put together, and manufacturer's document for SR values and maintenance plan. SR values would be given by the material that you would be purchasing. So let's look at option number 2. So you have one of these options and other 3 options. Quick photo references of open grade paving. This, if you remember, is also helpful in rainwater management. Then you have got PV shading. It creates electricity for you and also provide as as the shading for your vehicles. And architectural shading is something you look in the below left corner of the screen. This is not only a design, but it's also providing the shading or fulfilling the shading purposes. And you've got cool pavements, which reflects more than the standard one, and the dark pavement reflects only 10%, whereas your cooler pavement is going to reflect around 40%. So these are some of the strategies that serve the purpose of reducing the heat island effect. So option number 2 is roofing measures or roof measures for 1 point, and we have multiple strategies from which we can combine different strategies to achieve the required area. 50% of total vegetative roof is going to work. Roofing material for 75%. If you're using vegetated roof, then it will comply with 50%, and roofing material should cover 75% of total roof. And we have 2 types of roof: low sloped and high sloped roof. The low sloped roof is usually more exposed to the sun for more number of hours. High sloped roof will be exposed to less number of hours. That's the reason that low sloped roof have higher initial and 3-year aged SRI or solar reflectance index value of 82 and 64 respectively. And for high sloped, you have SRI 39 and 3-year age 32. Turf, by the way, does not count as a roofing measure. So the following is the formula. After documentation, you can see the area of high reflectance roof by 0.75, as it needs 75%. For vegetated roof is 0.5, which is 50%, and the combination of these 2 strategies should be more than the total roof area. And for the documentation, you should submit total roof area calculations and site plan with the project boundary, building footprint, with the roof area measures and the manufacturer's documentation, which shows what are the SRI values, because you will be submitting them for the review. This is option number 2. Let's look at option number 3. It is the combination of the 2, non-roof plus roof measures for 2 points. It's simply adding them all up, and it should be equal to total site paving area plus total roof area, and the documentation is also the addition of these 2 documentation. Let's have a look at some of the roof measures in a photographic form. So this is a high sloped roof, and you can see the low sloped roof, and it's more exposed to the sun. That's why the higher initial SRI and 3-year age values. The reflective material is going to reflect the sun more, and it's also going to have a less heat transfer below the roof. And vegetated roof is not only good looking, but it also serves the purpose of rain management, and here also in the heat island reduction. Option number 4 is parking under cover for 1 point. Minimum 50% of parking should be under cover. Now, there is a possibility that you have a parking in an open air, or you have a parking building. If it works as a building, in that case, the last floor or the roof of that building should have a roofing measures. And if it is on the ground and you have a shading system, then it should follow the non-roof measures. So if it is a roofing structure or a roofing measure, then 3-year age SRI of 32 or initial 39, or a structure can also be considered for renewable energy system like photovoltaic cell covered that we have seen in the previous slide. Motorcycle parking equals car parking. So when you are calculating the 50% of parking, motorcycle will be considered as 1 parking space. And underground parking qualifies for parking under cover. Roof may or may not be included under the conditions that I have explained. So for the documentation, the parking space calculations and the documentation of SR and SRI based on roof and non-roofing measures, based on the system of the parking, and it should include the maintenance program to ensure consistent compliance with the credit. Now, the exemplary performance of 1 point can be earned if you maximize the requirements of option number 1, 2, 3, and 4 to 95%. In option number 4, it's 50%. If you are moving all the parking or 95% of the parking under cover, then you are entitled to have exemplary performance of 1 point. Credit number 5 is light pollution reduction for 1 point. And this is the light in the outdoors. Since sustainable site talks about outdoors mainly, the purpose is to reduce the impact of artificial light and improve the visibility in the night. We've got more than one option. The first one is fixture shielding for 1 point. There are two things that are need to be considered. First is the mean lamp lumens, which we can find out on the data sheet of the fixture. A sample data sheet is here on the left in the blue. And this is one requirement. Second is if they do not emit light at angle more than 90 degrees from down. If they do not emit, the fixture is compliant. If they emit, then we have to find a way to stop. There are multiple strategies. One is retrofitting. Either you find a way to make a cover or a shield to put it on that fixture, or the second is if you change the lamp that is less than 2500 mean lumens. So you will not fall in that category and you do not need to shield that fixture. A sample fixture would be like this one. These kind of fixtures basically do not emit because the shielding is there. They do not emit light more than 90 degrees from down. And why it needs to be shielded? Because if more than 2500 lumens and you do not shield them, this is what you can see from above, from space, which looks nice from space. But if you look up from the ground to the space, the picture on the right shows that in the inner city, it's really hard to see any stars, which is basically the nighttime visibility. So the more you go outside the urban areas, the more stars you're going to see. So it's not like the stars were not there when you were in the urban setting. This is because of the light pollution that you are not able to see them. So the documentation for fixture shielding is just the luminaire shielding information. If you have done any retrofits, send the photographs and the data sheets that needs to confirm that the lamp lumens are more or less than 2500. The second option is perimeter measurements for 1 point. You have to have equidistant spacing. Minimum 8 measurements are to be taken, and the maximum spacing in between could be 100 feet. At that level, you have to measure light illuminance levels, and this can be done by any light meter, and the level difference between the lighting on and off should not be more than 20%. So one reading has to be taken with the light on, the other has to be taken with the light off, and the difference in between the two should not be more than 20%. Each measurement should comply. It's not like the average, you can take the average measurements and it's less than or more than 20%. Every single measurement should not exceed 20%. And the measurements can be taken after dawn or before dusk because you need 2 of them. So the documentation is side boundary showing all lighting points and the distance between the measurement points. Illumination measures for each point and percentage difference is need to be recorded. This is the site lighting, and you can see that you have to space them almost minimum 100 feet apart, and minimum 8 number of measurements are to be taken. So this is an alternative to fixture shielding for 1 point. Credit number 6 is site improvement plan for 1 point, which is to preserve ecological integrity and encourage environmental. It's kind of similar to protecting, restoring habitat, but in a way that you have a plan for another upcoming 5 years. So you should have a documentation of your existing site conditions. What's the situation of your hydrology, vegetation, how you can improve it, and what's your improvement strategy, what would be the monitoring protocols, and this plan should address if there are any water bodies or how you're going to manage the rainwater, if there is any reuse opportunities for the used water, gray water or rainwater, and how would you reduce the potable water use if you are gathering any HVAC condensate. So this is where it is addressing the hydrology part. Then you should have something in your plan that addresses the vegetation, what's existing, how you are planning for the native and invasive plants, if you are eradicating them or identifying them, and how it's going to protect the native species, basically the biodiversity, and the soils should also be addressed about the soil structure, how you're going to preserve that is healthy soil, and remediation of any compacted soil. So this is basically a high level plan, 5 years minimum, and you have to improve the conditions of these three factors. And the documentation is to submit this plan, and if you have taken any low or no cost measures to improve these strategies or hydrology, vegetation, and soil topics, and qualification of professional consultants if you have hired them to make this plan. Credit number 6 is joint use of facilities, 1.4 school only. If you remember that the rainwater management, the school had 1 point less. So this is where the school is, or the adaptation of school is recuperating that 1 point to make the total of sustainable site 10 points. And the requirement is to integrate a school with the community by sharing the building and its facilities like the playing fields for any other events that are not related to the school and some function that can be held in the space. The purpose is that the school is used or school is utilized in the school hours, and after 2 or 3 o'clock the facility is vacant and it can be used for other purposes. So we've got multiple options. Every option is going to give 1 point. At least the first is to have at least 3 of the following available for public use. So you are integrating the public with the school facility. Usually they have gym, auditorium, cafe, a playing field, joint parking, or more than one classroom. The stadium can be used. So these facilities which are dead or not used after 3 o'clock can be utilized by the public, and it can also give the school a 1 point. But one thing needs to make sure that the access of washroom after school hours are available to everyone who is going to the auditorium, gym, cafe, or whatever 3 facilities you are choosing to share with the public. For option number 2, you should have a contract with the community to provide at least 2 of the following. You can have inside school 2 of the following, of course, after the school hours. You can have a health clinic, commercial office, community service center, police office, library, media center, parking, 1 or more commercial business. So the first one was for the public. The second option is for the community, and the third option is this is different from the first 2 in the sense that they are not using school facility, but school is using other facilities. Share at least 2 of the following spaces owned by other organization to students. So in this case, students are using the other facilities like auditorium if there is anyone nearby, gym, cafe, playing field, swimming pool, or any stadium nearby. But we have to make sure that the access to all these facilities in option number 3 is by foot and in the walking distance, and safe walking is possible from the school to these facilities. So documentation is the signed agreement, how spaces will be shared, after what time, the access to the washroom in case of option 1 is available, and site plan showing pedestrian access. This is what I said in option number 3, that pedestrian access, a safe pedestrian access from school to all of the option number 3 should be provided, and distance from school to joint use spaces. So this sums up the sustainable sites chapter or credit category. I will continue on with the water efficiency. Thank you very much for your attention. Credit number 6 is joint use of facilities, 1.4 school only. If you remember that the rainwater management, the school had 1 point less. So this is where the school is, or the adaptation of school is recuperating that 1 point to make the total of sustainable site 10 points. And the requirement is to integrate a school with the community by sharing the building and its facilities like the playing fields for any other events that are not related to the school and some function that can be held in the space. The purpose is that the school is used or school is utilized in the school hours, and after 2 or 3 o'clock the facility is vacant and it can be used for other purposes. So we've got multiple options. Every option is going to give 1 point. At least the first is to have at least 3 of the following available for public use. So you are integrating the public with the school facility. Usually they have gym, auditorium, cafe, a playing field, joint parking, or more than one classroom. The stadium can be used. So these facilities which are dead or not used after 3 o'clock can be utilized by the public, and it can also give the school a 1 point. But one thing needs to make sure that the access of washroom after school hours are available to everyone who is going to the auditorium, gym, cafe, or whatever 3 facilities you are choosing to share with the public. For option number 2, you should have a contract with the community to provide at least 2 of the following. You can have inside school 2 of the following, of course, after the school hours. You can have a health clinic, commercial office, community service center, police office, library, media center, parking, 1 or more commercial business. So the first one was for the public. The second option is for the community, and the third option is this is different from the first 2 in the sense that they are not using school facility, but school is using other facilities. Share at least 2 of the following spaces owned by other organization to students. So in this case, students are using the other facilities like auditorium if there is anyone nearby, gym, cafe, playing field, swimming pool, or any stadium nearby. But we have to make sure that the access to all these facilities in option number 3 is by foot and in the walking distance, and safe walking is possible from the school to these facilities. So documentation is the signed agreement, how spaces will be shared, after what time, the access to the washroom in case of option 1 is available, and site plan showing pedestrian access. This is what I said in option number 3, that pedestrian access, a safe pedestrian access from school to all of the option number 3 should be provided, and distance from school to joint use spaces. So this sums up the sustainable sites chapter or credit category. I will continue on with the water efficiency. Thank you very much for your attention.